Hi, and welcome to the webinar on nanomaterial that we are organizing here today. My name is Jenny Holmqvist, and I'm coordinating in nanomaterial activities here in ECHA. And together with my colleagues, we hope that we will be able to give you a lot of things to think about ahead of the important deadline in January 2020. The new information requirements relating to nanomaterials is a result after a long-standing discussions that some of you might be aware of. And the aim of this discussion was to be able to provide more information on nanomaterials through the existing legal framework, where REACH is actually the main one for us here in ECHA. It aims at also to provide clarity on what company needs to think about when registering nanomaterials under REACH. Please keep in mind that the information requirements that now comes into force is also addressing existing registrations. So if one of you have an existing registration in place, you will have to go back to this information requirement and assess whether or not the new information requirements are relevant for you. And keep in mind also that these are entering into force of 1st of January 2020, which gives us very short time to work on this. And this is also one of the main reasons why we have this webinar. The big reason why this new information requirement has come into place is that we want to first of all enable companies the clarity on what is needed, but mainly this is to be able to assess the hazardous properties of these nanomaterials. And we also want to make sure, together with industry, that these can be used safely and understand a bit more whether or not some of these are posing a risk to human health or the environment. And based on those risks, to determine the appropriate risk management measures. The changes in the annexes, you will only hear some of these changes today, and we will talk in particular on the characterization of nanoforms and sets of nanoforms in Annex 6. And we will also give you detailed information on how these can be reported under the existing tools such as IUCLID. However, keep in mind that these are not the only changes that are entering into force in January next year. There are changes in, for example, downstream user obligation, also for Annex 1, and not to mention, or most importantly perhaps, changes in which information requirements are needed for human health and the environment. What you can expect today, as like I already said, we will provide you with a detailed information on characterization, the new information requirement or aspects that are established now in relation to that. We will also go into the details on how these should be reported, and by giving you an overview and practical aspects of the new fields that are introduced into IUCLID. We will even give you practical examples for you to understand how it can look like in practice or in reality. Let's have a look at the agenda. We will start with the requirements for registration and substance identification. We will then move on to the new information requirements and how they have impacted on our IT tools and the current formats that we have. We will look into closely on the IUCLID formats for characterization of these nanoforms and sets of nanoforms, by also then giving the illustrative examples. Then I will come back and give you some conclusions of the day and some take-home messages. Keep in mind that the speakers and the presentations is not the only way you can interact or listen to us today. We have also a number of colleagues which are online and there to be able to help you and answer questions that you may have during in addressing these topics that we have on the table today, or any other question that you might have. Please keep in mind that when you use this process or this option, that you don't send us any confidential information, since we will not be able to handle that during this webinar or through the question and answers that we have made available. If you should have any difficulties in access or hearing this webinar, kindly let us know through the same tool. And also if there is any other aspects in relation to the technical aspects, we are here to listen. The questions you may have during the webinar, you can send at any time. And if we are not able to answer your question during today, we will get back to you by forwarding your question to help desk, and through the normal procedure, we will get a reply from us. So please use this option. We have many colleagues backstage who can help you out through this 1.5 hours that we have together. So we really hope that you will use that. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tuomas Aitasalo, and I work in the chemistry unit here in ECA. In the first part of this webinar, I will, together with my colleague Abdel Tumrin, explain the requirements for registration and substance identification of nanoforms. I will start by defining the terms nanoform and set of similar nanoforms. Then I will explain briefly how the joint submission of data for nanoforms and sets of nanoforms can be done. Then I will explain in the details the characterization parameters of the nanoforms as defined in the updated REACH Annex 6 and how to fulfill the data requirements for each parameter following the ECA guidance on nanomaterials, which will be published as an appendix applicable to the guidance on registration and substance identification. It should be noted that although the characterization parameters are addressed one by one in this webinar and also in the ECA guidance, in practice the parameters have influence on each other, and when considering what constitutes a nanoform, all the 4 parameters needs to be taken into consideration. I will start with the definition of a nanoform. The updated REACH Annex defines, based on European Commission recommendation for a definition of a nanomaterial, a nanoform as a form of a substance which contains of particles in an unbound state or as aggregate or as agglomerate, and where 50% or more of the particles in number size distribution, one or more external dimensions, is in the size range 1 to 100 nanometers. With derogation for fullerenes, graphene flakes, and single-wall carbon nanotubes. It's important to note that nanoform as a form of substance is registered in the same registration with all the other forms of a substance. The updated Annex 6 stipulates that a nanoform needs to be characterized based on the parameters defined in section 2.4. These parameters are particle size distribution and number fraction of constituent particles in size range within 1 to 100 nanometers. Description of surface functionalization or treatment, shape, aspect ratio, and other morphological characterization, as well as a specific surface area. According to the updated REACH text, substance may have one or more different nanoforms based on the differences in the characterization parameters. As none of the characterization parameters of a nanoform can in practice have a single numerical value, the guidance further defines that for a nanoform, the variation in the characterization parameters can be due to the batch-to-batch variability inherent to a manufacturing process with certain process parameters. From this follows that the process parameters to produce a nanoform can be modified only to minimize the batch-to-batch variability. Then I go to the definition of the set of similar nanoforms. The updated Annex 6 defines the set of similar nanoforms as a group of nanoforms with clearly defined boundaries in terms of the characterization parameters in points 242 and 245. In addition, you need to provide a justification demonstrating that the hazard assessment, exposure assessment, and risk assessment of the nanoforms in the set can be performed jointly. Further, nanoform can only belong to one set of similar nanoforms. The EGA guidance on nanoforms gives further advice on a justification for a set of similar nanoforms. In essence, the justification needs to show that hazard profile for all the nanoforms in the set is the same, and that the data submitted for all the hazard endpoints is applicable for all the nanoforms in the set. The justification needs to be supported by data. The nanoforms with different uses do not need to be put in different sets of similar nanoforms, but all the different uses of the nanoforms in the set needs to be detailed. Next, I will briefly explain how the joint submission of data can be done. This figure you can find from the EGA guidance on nanoforms. In this figure, each box with letter-number combination represents a nanoform. The nanoforms with same letter but different number are nanoforms with same specifications. The nanoforms with black edges of the box are manufactured or imported by lead registrant, those with blue edges by member 1 and those with purple edges by member 2. The black, red, blue and purple ovals represent boundaries for sets of nanoforms defined by each co-registrant, that to say set 1A, 1B, 2A and 2B. The nanoform Z1 is different from nanoforms with specification X or Y and cannot be in the same set with them. Therefore, it needs to be reported on its own. Joint Z1, the oval with light blue background, represents the combined boundaries of set 1A and 1B at the joint submission level. These boundaries are defined for two purposes. First of all, for the purpose of linking full hazard dataset 1 to nanoforms with specification A, B, X, and Y. And second of all, to develop a justification that the hazard assessment of these nanoforms can be performed jointly. Same applies in analogy to joint set 2. Now we go back to the full figure and see what happens in steps 1, 2, and 3. In step 1, each registrant identifies the nanoforms they manufacture or import. When they have defined all the nanoforms which are in the scope of their registration, they will create in step 2 the initial sets of nanoforms. However, the initial sets may need to be redefined in step 3. In step 3, the co-registrants of nanoforms of the same substance discuss and agree on the reporting of sets of nanoforms for the full joint submission. All the parameters of Annex 6 must be specified for the sets agreed at the joint submission level and reported in a form of a boundary composition in Euclid. Defining the set for each legal entity and for the full joint submission can be seen as an iterative process. The sets defined at level of joint submission may have an impact on the sets that each legal entity reports in their own registration dossier and vice versa. This involves also agreeing on a justification for the sets of similar nanoforms. Then a few words about the principles of reporting. The range of values mentioned in the EGA guidance and in this webinar means in case of a nanoform, batch-to-batch variability, and in case of set of similar nanoforms, the values setting the boundaries for the set. The analytical data included in the registration dossier needs to show the typical values of the characterization parameters for a nanoform, or the values setting the boundaries for the set of similar nanoforms. For a parameter like shape, for which no numerical value can be provided, representative figures showing each shape or mix of shapes need to be provided. Then I go to the actual characterization parameters of the nanoforms, and I start with the requirements for particle size distribution. The legal requirement is to provide number-based particle size distribution with indication of the number fraction of constituent particles in the size range within 1 to 100 nanometers. In practice, this needs to be reported as a histogram with a table of values on which the histogram is based on, and the D10, D50, and D90 values derived from the distribution. The D values are especially important when the set of similar nanoforms is built, as they define the boundaries for the set. The number fraction of constituent particles is reported as a value between 50 and 100%. For elongated particles, the length, and for the platelets, the lateral dimension needs to be also reported. If nanoform consists of particles falling under different shape categories, for example, spheres and rods, separate reporting of the particle size distribution of these particle fractions is expected. If existing scientific knowledge shows that a certain nanoform or for a certain substance there is a threshold particle size within the range 1 to 100 nanometers, which induces a specific effect for particles with size above or below that size, you must define two different sets of nanoforms. In addition, the impact of certain physicochemical, ecotoxicological, or toxicological properties need to be taken into consideration, and these considerations need to be included in the justification of the set of similar nanoforms. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Abdel Sumrain, and I will continue with you right now with describing the different reporting requirements for the characterization parameters, continuing on with the surface functionalization or treatment. So first of all, what do we need to report for surface treatment? The first thing you need to do is, of course, identify the surface treating agent by providing information about the UPAC name and CAS or EC number of your surface treating agent. In addition to that, you need to give us a description of the main features of your surface treatment process. So this could include things like giving information about what type of reaction is occurring, for example, a hydrolysis reaction, and giving information about the process parameters that are relevant. In addition, we ask you to provide information about the molar ratio of the surface treating agents that you use, and to give us a description of the functionalities that are formed on the surface by this particular surface treatment. So for example, you are introducing a hydroxyl group or an amino group on the surface of your particles. In addition, we would want you to report information on the weight-by-weight contribution of the surface treating agents over the total weight of your particle. You need to give us information about the percentage coverage of the particle's surface, and you should, very importantly, give us a schematic that gives a visual description of the surface treatment, including the functionalities that are formed on the surface of the particles. Now, I'll describe a bit when you should not put different surface-treated particles in the same set of nanoforms. And a couple of principles first. So, in principle, whenever you have a different surface treatment that is resulting in a different surface chemistry, these should be considered as different nanoforms and reported on their own. So this is the general principle. What you should never do is report nanoforms that have surface treatments together in the same set as nanoforms with no surface treatment at all. Now, having said that, you can actually put different nanoforms with different surface treatments into the same set if you obey certain rules. So the first thing that you should pay attention to is you should make sure that the surface treating agents are chemically similar to each other. You should also make sure that the resulting surface chemistry on the particle is similar in terms of the functionalities that you introduce and the overall composition of the particle's surface. And you should make sure that there isn't a significant variability in the percentage of the coverage of the particle's surface. And finally, and very importantly, that there are no differences in the toxicity or ecotoxicity of the surface treating agents that you use. Now, moving on to the information requirement on shape, aspect ratio, and assembly structure. First of all, there is a large variety of possible shapes that a nanoform can have. And in order to structure this information a little bit, we want the information to be reported in different shape categories. So there are now 4 different shape categories that you can select, and then within each shape category, you have the specific shapes that fall under that category. So we have a spheroidal shape category. This is covering particles that have an aspect ratio of less than 3:1 and particles that are approximately equiaxial. This could include shapes like cubes, like prisms, like spheres, etc. The next shape category is the elongated shape category, and this covers particles that have an aspect ratio of greater than 3:1 with 2 similar dimensions, and then the third dimension being significantly larger. So this could cover shapes like tubes, like wires, like rods. The third shape category is what we call platelets, and this is covering particles that have one external dimension that is significantly smaller than the 2 other dimensions of the particle. And this covers things like plates, like disks. The final shape category that we have is something we call multimodal shapes. So this is particles whose shapes belong to different shape categories, rather than having only one category of shapes. So this could include, for example, particles that have both spheroidal and elongated shapes within the same particle, and different combinations of these. An important thing to emphasize is that such multimodal shaped particles should be the result of a single manufacturing process, rather than taking different shaped particles after the manufacture is complete and mixing them together. Now, what should you report then on this information requirement? First of all, you need to specify the shape category that we mentioned in the previous slide and the specific shape that falls under that shape category. Then you need to report the concentration of the specific shapes, if there are different shapes covered by that particular particle. Then in specific cases, you need to provide some additional information. So if you have an assembly structure, then you need to provide information on the number of walls or the layers that are involved in this assembly structure. If you are talking about elongated particles and platelets, then you need to report the aspect ratio, and you are recommended to provide information about the rigidity of the particles. Now, As with the previous parameters, there are situations where you should not report two different nanoforms in the same set. And the general rule here is that if the parameters of shape, the external dimension, the aspect ratio, the rigidity, if any of these parameters of the particular nanoform do not allow you to do the hazard assessment together, then you should put these particles into different sets of nanoforms. Moving on to crystallinity. This is simpler than the previous two parameters. With crystallinity, we ask you to report the information about the names or crystal systems of the structures involved in your particular nanoparticle. And then you need to provide information about the concentration of each crystal structure present if there are then multiple crystal structures present as part of the nanoform. You should not, nevertheless, put different nanoforms into a single set if the particles have different crystalline structures. So as a starting point, these should be belonging to different sets of nanoforms. And if you have also nanoforms with a specific crystal structure and a separate nanoform with different, the mix of crystal structures, you should not, as a starting point, combine these into the same set of nanoforms. Now, having said that, with the appropriate scientific justification, if you have, for example, existing scientific information showing that these different crystal structures have the same hazard properties, then you can put these crystal structures in the same set. So with the specific surface area, we ask you to report information about the range of the specific surface area that is covered by your nanoform. And then if you are using BET to measure your surface area and you're reporting the volume-specific surface area, then you also need to provide information about the skeletal density of your particles. If in certain situations, you should not include nanoforms with different surface areas together. And this is, as a general rule, when the information on the specific surface area has an impact on the hazard assessment, if it has an impact on some of these parameters like dissolution rate, the toxic kinetics, the bioavailability of your particles, then you should not put such nanoforms together in the same set of nanoforms. Now I will move on to talk about the different analytical information that you need to provide on these parameters. So of course, you need to report on these parameters, and you need to, for each parameter, provide some supporting analytical information. I'll go now parameter by parameter to give information about what analytical information you need to report. So a couple of general rules to start with. First of all, the analytical data that you provide has to be obtained on the particles as they are manufactured. And the second thing is that you need to provide a description of the analytical methods that you use, or you need to give then appropriate bibliographical references for your analytical information. Now, for your particle size distribution, we recommend you to provide information from at least one electron microscopy technique. Of course, you are allowed to use other techniques, but having information from electron microscopy is quite useful. Also for your next parameter, which is shape, there you need to have information about electron microscopy as part of your analytical information. You can use different techniques, and of course you need to select the appropriate technique based on the individual material properties that you are registering. As for crystallinity, we ask you to provide information on electron diffraction or X-ray powder diffraction. In some cases, for example, if you are characterizing amorphous nanoforms, you may need information for more than one technique. And then you need to report some information for quantitative phase analysis, and you need to provide basically the most appropriate information that you have or you can obtain for your specific particle. For surface treatment, you should provide the most appropriate methods to analyze the composition of the particles as a whole, including their surface treatment. And we recommend that you give analytical data to identify the information about the functionalities that are formed on the particle's surface. Finally, for the specific surface area, you should provide information normally coming from BET isotherm. You can use the ISO 9277 method. And then if you are reporting volume-specific surface area, you can report information on skeletal density using the ISO 12154 method. And you should report these informations then in your Euclid dossier. And with that, I come to the end of my talk. Thank you for listening to this.
Welcome to the part in which we'll introduce new fields in formats in Euclid and explain how to fill in information on nanomaterials in a Euclid dossier. I'm Anna Daszyńska, and in the Data Availability Unit, I'm working on data validation and completeness. Today, I share the floor with my colleague, Askar Nurasilov, who in the next part of this webinar will present illustrative examples of reporting. But before we move on to the specific fields in Euclid, let's have an overview of the changes in Euclid that were introduced by the latest release. So, what's new in Euclid 6.4 that has an impact on data specific to nanoforms? There are new fields for reporting nanoforms in section 1.2 for their characterization parameters and relevant analytical data in section 1.4. Along with the new fields and formats, there is a set of technical completeness check rules, ensuring that the relevant information is provided, information from the new fields is disseminated by ECHA, and all these changes and step-by-step instructions are now provided in the updated manuals on dossier preparation. Manual on registration dossier has an annex specific to nanoforms. For more technical information on Euclid and to download the latest version, please go to the Euclid website. There are also modules integrated in Euclid, performing a completeness check and filtration of data, the validation assistant, and the dissemination preview tool. Changes to the fields and format have also brought significant change to all registration and inquiry dossiers. As of 1st of November 2019, the selection in state form field has become mandatory. This was implemented in order to distinguish compositions that are covering nanoforms from other compositions in the dossiers. In this part, we'll focus on the fields that are specific for nanoforms. As I already mentioned on my previous slide, the selection in the field state form has become mandatory, and in order to report information on nanoforms, you need to select solid nanoform in the pig list. This selection activates specific fields in Euclid that are relevant to nanoforms. Please ensure that you use the latest version of Euclid because it's not possible to prepare a successful submission that fulfills the rich requirements for nanoforms with previous versions of Euclid. Based on the requirements and concepts explained by my colleagues in the previous part of this webinar, you need to select the proper approach for reporting, and this is indicated in the pig list type of information reported. If you have basis to report your nanoforms in the set, this must be indicated in this field. And based on that selections, different fields are activated for a single nanoform and for a set. If you report set of nanoforms, you select set of nanoforms, and then you need to provide a justification for the set. In order to provide your justification, you should use the template that is available in Euclid. And to edit the template, you click on Insert Existing Templates button, upload the template to the field, edit it to address all relevant points. And this justification will be manually checked by ECHA during completeness check. Also, in addition to the justification provided in the field, you can attach additional information in the below field Attached Information. If information supporting your justification is provided elsewhere in your dossier, you can also use the cross-reference functionality to link it with the justification. But please remember that the main argumentation of your justification must be provided in the field. Justification must be structured on the template in Euclid, and this will be manually checked by ECHA in completeness check process. There are new fields for reporting characterization parameters in section 1.2, and here is a list of these parameters that must be reported. In the next part of the webinar, we'll explain and show some examples of reporting for these parameters. And with the new fields, new information will be published by ECHA. For the fields for nanoforms, attachment, remarks, and justifications are not published, but for other information you would like to keep confidential, you must select confidentiality flag on relevant parameters. We recommend you to use the dissemination preview tool to check what information from the dossier will be published by ECHA. Another changes are introduced in Euclid section 1.4, Analytical Information, where there is a new template for reporting the data on analysis carried out on the nanoforms. And this information should be reported in the table and should be specific for each parameters reported in section 1.2 composition. And it's important that you link composition with analytical data through the related composition field. Just to wrap up what must be reported in section 1.4. So for each characterization parameter reported in section 1.2, you must provide corresponding data in section 1.4 and link the section through the related composition fields. If you attach analytical report containing the analysis for more than one parameter, you must select the appropriate parameters and analytical methods in the applicable pick lists. And also, if you cannot provide results for the indicated parameter, the reasoning must be clearly justified in section 1.4. Additionally, if you prepare registration dossiers where Annex 7 to 11 information requirements are provided, you must provide a complete study record in section 4.28.8 nanomaterial dustiness, and this is relevant for all individual and joint submission lead registrant dossiers, as well as for those member registrant dossier where the information is opted out for. When preparing your dossier, please pay attention to report identity and concentration of constituents, including any additives or impurities following the REACH requirements, and this information needs to be reported with respect to the particle without surface treatment. If you need to report different classifications in section 2.1, make sure that these are linked correctly with compositional records in section 1.2. And you must report separate endpoint study records in section 4 to 8 for each nanoform or set of nanoforms, clearly detailing the test material used in the studies. Before you submit your dossier to ECHA, we advise you to run the validation assistant tool to check if the required information is provided. We also recommend to use the dissemination preview tool to check what information from the dossier will be published by ECHA. For more information and to see manuals on dossier preparation, please visit IUCLID website. As I mentioned in the beginning, there is manual on REACH and PPOR dossier that has an annex specific to nanoforms. It has also overview of all completeness check rules performed on the nano dossiers. Also, you can access these manuals from your IUCLID instance by clicking on the square question mark icon on the top of IUCLID window. For additional information, and you can click on the help text specific in IUCLID on the question mark icon that is next to the field label to read more information about that specific field. If you have any questions, please submit your question to ECHA through the contact form, and you can watch more material and ECHA webinar, and here is the link to ECHA website. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Askar Norasilov, and I work in Data Availability Unit. And today I will guide you through 4 illustrative examples on how to report certain parameters for nanoforms in Euclid. Namely, the focus of these examples will be on reporting shape, particle size distribution, crystallinity, and surface treatment. In the illustrative example number 1, we will focus on reporting shape for single nanoform. For that, we will use the form B. On the slide, you can see some characterization data for the form B. However, in this particular example, we are interested in the information on the shape. So you can see that the form B has particles with 2 shape types. So let's report now. To begin with, one should remember that when reporting a nanoform, one should create the separate composition record. Then, in order to activate the fields relevant for nanoform, we specify like solid nanoform in the pick list state form, and then we specify the type of information reported. In this case, it's single nanoform. So let's start with filling in the information on the particles of form B, which have the cubic shape. To begin with, we need to press on the bottom a new item in order to activate the relevant fields. Further, we specify the shape category. Next, we specify the shape, which is cubic. And further, as the form B consists of particles with 2 shape types, we have to say no in the pure shape field. And next, we indicate the typical composition and range. By following the same steps for the particles with the second shape type in the form B, we obtain the following table. Please note that typical composition indicates the typical concentration of particles with certain shape in the nanoform. However, the range reflects the batch-to-batch variability in the nanoform. In the illustrative example number 2, we will report the parameter particle size distribution for a set of nanoform. And in this example, we will use a set D. And how you can see, set D represents a set of nanoform, namely form A, form B, and form C. Form A has particles only with 1 shape type, form B with 2 shape types, and there are 3 shape types in the form C. Let's have a look at the particle size distribution data for the set D, which is represented on this slide in the forms of percentile and histograms. And please remember, when registering nanoforms as a set, a separate composition record for the set has to be created. And there is a need to specify the type of information reported. And in this scenario, it's a set of nanoform. And when reporting a set of nanoform, there must be always the justification provided in the relevant field by using the templates given in Euclid. So again, we specify the shape category, which is spheroidal in this case. Then we fill in this table for the percentile values D10, D50, and D90. How you can see, the typical value field is not activated here because this is not applicable for the set. And on the contrary, the range is activated, and the range reflects the variation between nanoforms that are part of the set. In addition, fraction of constituent particles in the size range from 1 to 100 nanometers must be provided. And in case any other information is available on morphological characterization, please add it in the field additional information. In the illustrative example number 3, we will report the parameter crystallinity, also for the set D. Here you can see the table with the data on the crystallinity for the form set of the set D. As you can see, the form A has particles with only hexagonal crystal system. Therefore, it will be reported as a separate entry. Hexagonal crystal system is also present in the form B and the form C. However, it will be reported separately from the hexagonal crystal system of the form A because form B and form C possess also other structures. Following the same logic, we fill in the information for amorphous structure in the form B and form C together. And the last entry will be created for the orthorhombic crystal system, which is present in the form C. So we obtain the following table. What is important here is to note that for form A, we indicate crystalline in the column structure because form A consists of only crystalline particles. And however, for the rest of the forms, we specify partially crystalline because there are more than one structure types present. And again, the typical composition is not applicable for the set. And in this scenario, the range is the smallest and largest concentration of particles with certain structure in the nanoform that are part of the set. And in the illustrative example number 4, we will focus on reporting surface treatment for a single nanoform with a treated surface. And in this scenario, we will use the form E. How you can see, the form E represents a single nanoform with a treated surface. And to begin with, we need to specify that the surface treatment was applied by selecting yes in the relevant field. Then we give the name on the surface treatment. Further, there is a need to specify the surface treatment agent applied and also to link a reference substance that describes the surface treatment agent. Please remember that the reference substance, which describes the surface treatment agent applied, has to be given a UPAC name. And if the name following the UPAC nomenclature cannot be derived, other chemical name which represents the chemical nature of the agent applied has to be provided. In addition, where available, CAS and EC number also should be provided. So here we see the table, we fill the information, we specify the surface treatment agent, we added the information typical weight by weight contribution. Please note that there is a need to provide the description of the process behind the surface treatment, and this information is not disseminated. In the end, I would like to point out that there is a need to use the validation assistant. And by this, I would like to conclude the part of illustrative examples. Thank you very much.
Hi, we are coming to the end of our webinar, and we hope that you find it useful and informative. Before we end, we would like to give you some take-home messages. The first one is relating to time. January 2020 is not far into the future, and therefore we encourage you to, as soon as possible, if you haven't already done so, familiarize yourself with the new information requirement and assess whether or not they are applicable or relevant for what you put on the market. We also want to say that there are a number of guidances and other information on our website that can be useful for when you decide on what to update and if you're going to update your registration dossiers. And we encourage you to go back and have a look at what's already there. And lastly, we would like to remind you that ECHA Help Desk and the National Help Desk are there to support you. Please use that opportunity if needed. We will also like to tell you that although we only talked about characterization and reporting, we are aware of that there is a need to update other guidances, such as human health and the environment. We are currently working on this, and we hope that we'll be able to release new versions of these important guidances next year. We also take note and follow closely the updates and the work on revising the existing test guidelines. Test guidelines for us are extremely important to be able to generate robust and relevant data on chemicals in general, and so also for nanomaterials. And finally, on this slide, I would like to also point out that since a couple of years ago, ECHA has now an observatory for nanomaterials. On this website, you can find a lot of important and informative material, but you can also find a table where we have tried to compile available methods already, such as standards and other kind of international agreed or recognized methods that could also be useful when discussing and assessing whether or not new data is needed for nanomaterials. And this video recording will be made publicly available after this webinar has ended, and you can always go back and watch it again. And we hope that this will also then be able to use for those of other registrants that were not able to listen today, can go back also have a look at this webinar. The question and answer panel are still here, and will continue answering questions that comes in. So if you still have those, please don't hesitate, just send them. We will be happy to continue answering questions that comes in. And again, as I said in the beginning, if your questions is not answered today, for whatever reason, we have forwarded that to the help desk and they will get back to you shortly. And again, also keep in mind that when you use the question and answer panel that we have open right now, don't send us confidential information because we are not able to handle that through this channel. Thank you very much for taking part of this. And again, we hope you find it useful. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank those on this side who have put down a lot of time and energy and effort into making those presentations as informative as we hope you found them. Thank you.